Can the two takes on the world put forward by Ian McGilchrist give us any insight into why we can think so differently from one another? Could it also shed light on the huge disparity between how Job's friends attended to his suffering and how God does? Hello and welcome to this video on dealing with complexity at church. We're exploring frameworks and models and how they apply to the conversations we might have. This video looks at The Master and His Emissary by Ian McGilchrist. In his book, Ian McGilchrist puts forward the idea that there are two takes on the world. One of which, to put it simply and briefly, is concerned with closing down to a certainty, and the other is concerned with opening up to a possibility. One, therefore, and Ian associates this with the left hemisphere, aims to reach one correct answer. It thinks in terms of either or. The other, associated with the right hemisphere, is more able to live with ambivalence and the possibility of two apparently incompatible possibilities being true, and it thinks in terms of both and. He notes that for some birds this manifests in the following way. The left hemisphere uses the right eye to focus narrowly on the ground for seeds amongst gravel. It pinpoints, categorizes, and utilizes that information to get what it needs. The right hemisphere, using the left eye, scans the horizon, taking a broad sweep of the environment for anything that it might need to become aware of, mates or predators, for example. He points out that previous theories made the brain out to be modular, saying what part of the brain did what. For example, the left was responsible for language and maths, and the right was responsible for vision and creativity. We now know, however, that both left and right hemispheres are required for language, for vision, for maths, and for creativity. It turns out it's not a case of what each hemisphere does, but how each hemisphere does it that makes the two hemispheres different. Let's take language as an example. The left hemisphere is used for denoting what individual words mean, but the right hemisphere provides important contextual information to bring meaning to the whole sentence. A joke requires us to understand that words and forms are being played with, and their meaning is not closed down to an either or, but to a both and. The left provides the literal meaning of the words, but the right sees the context that makes it funny. The left hemisphere will pin down and deconstruct an idea. It wants to capture the butterfly, pin it to the board, and look at it under the microscope. This means it can understand its every mechanism, but also means the butterfly dies in the process. The right hemisphere will see the butterfly as part of an ecosystem that's living. This means it can observe its living symbiosis and its interconnected nature, but also means it cannot predict or control what it will do. Ian shows that in many ways we must pass things from right to left and back again. Our right hemisphere will notice the butterfly in the first instance as a novelty, something new that has entered our broad visual field. The left hemisphere will have a desire to understand it fully by deconstruction. Ian stresses, though, that this information must then be passed back to the right hemisphere so that the butterfly can be further appreciated as part of a living whole in a fuller sense. Another analogy is that of a musician that hears a piece of music and appreciates it for its beauty, and then, note by note, learns the music slowly. With enough practice, it can then be played without thinking and performed with a new appreciation due to the individual parts now making up a greater and more intimately understood whole. This idea establishes the two takes on the world that we will see recurring through the rest of these videos. And this perhaps makes sense of different approaches to the Bible and church we can take. One looks for explicit categories or structures that are clear-cut and easily applicable, atomizing the text, for example, down to each Greek word for meaning, and the service down to a strict format. The other approach being one that is happy with paradox and looks for meaning in context with overarching themes. Sees church as something that can happen anywhere and at any time. The book of Job can be split into the debate between Job and his friends, which atomizes, categorizes, and tries to close down the relationship between God and man. And then the broad sweeping tour of nature that God conducts with Job, displaying the deep interconnected relationship between God and his creation that is full of open questions. Ian McGilchrist concludes that the left hemisphere should be in service to the right, the emissary to its master. but that all too often the left breaks away and assumes authority. In many ways, we can see a parallel in that Jesus acts as the faithful servant to the Master, God. He emptied himself of his own will and allows for God to continually inform him of the greater purpose that should be enacted in the world by him, in that he is the right hand of his salvation, which interestingly lateralizes to the left hemisphere. Now, one trap the left hemisphere often gets itself into is to think that it knows everything. But clearly, Jesus confesses there are things beyond his knowledge. The left hemisphere wants to control things, but Jesus overcomes the temptation to manipulate things so that stones become bread or that kingdoms come under his control. Jesus shows a healthy integration of the left hemisphere in service to the right, as his role as the faithful servant in service to his Master, God. I hope you found this video useful. Our next video will look at Otto Scharmer's levels of listening from Theory U. And this might be an interesting way to see how we can move from right to left and back again when listening to others in conversation.